we're right at the time. Welcome all. I'm so glad you're taking time out of your day to join us in this session of a showcase of EPA's greenhouse gas evaluation tools. I wish we could be in person, but the advantage of being remote is that we can access our headquarters colleagues. So I'm really pleased to share that Andrea Denny is here with us from EPA headquarters Office of Air and Radiation, and she'll be presenting on the tribal greenhouse gas footprint tool, although I think I didn't quite say that right, so Andrea, you'll correct me. So today we're just going to give you really what it is, a showcase code. So kind of a sampling of a lot of EPA's tools that can help you quantify the greenhouse gas impacts of your actions and quantify those benefits. So with that, I'll turn it over to Andrea.
Great, thanks, Jenny. So yes, I should have advanced to this slide while Jenny was talking, but you'll hear about those tools later. So as Jenny said, I'm Andrea Denny. I'm with EPA's State and Local Energy and Environment Program. And though we don't have tribal in our name, we do also work with tribes a little bit and try and make sure that the resources we're producing can be helpful to you all as well. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but Jenny had done it for all the other tools. So I did a version for the tribal greenhouse gas inventory tool, and you'll be able to see that and have the link and everything when you download it from the website later. So a little bit of background before I dive into the tool itself. I thought I would spend just a few minutes giving a little bit of context about why you might want to think about doing a greenhouse gas inventory, why why people do them, what they can be used for, that kind of thing. So really, when we think about greenhouse gas inventories, typically they're being done to help identify the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions in your geographic region. So this is, when you start thinking about mitigation, it's helpful to know what sources are the largest to think about where you might want to tackle reducing those emissions. It also can be very helpful for understanding emissions trends. Sometimes, in addition to knowing what the biggest sources are, you want to know what's increasing the most rapidly, what might be decreasing on its own naturally, that might help you steer where you invest your mitigation efforts. Other reasons to develop an action plan, if you have a goal or a commitment to reduce emissions, you can use an inventory to track progress towards that, or you can use the inventory as the basis of setting those goals or targets for future reductions. I also wanted to very briefly touch on a little bit of vocabulary that you might hear a lot when people talk about greenhouse gas inventories, and that I'll be using a little bit in my presentation today. So that's the difference between direct and indirect emissions. And sometimes you will hear people talk about scopes. Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 are very commonly used when we talk about greenhouse gas emissions. So direct emissions, or Scope 1 emissions, those are emissions that are actually being released within the boundary that you're looking at. So, if this is within your tribal lands or within your community, this is what's actually being emitted in that boundary. So that's things like fossil fuel combustion, oil or gas that's being used to heat your home or to cook in your home, fertilizer that you're putting on your land, a landfill if the landfill is actually in your community. Then we also have indirect emissions, which are Scope 2 and 3. And those are emissions that happen outside of your boundary, but they're happening because of activity that's going on within your boundary. So the big one, which gets its own scope all to itself, Scope 2, is purchased electricity. So that's electricity that you're not generating on site. You're buying that from, a utility company or something off site. And then basically everything else falls in Scope 3. So that could be things like if you're generating trash, but you don't own your landfill, you're sending it to a landfill in another community. There's emissions coming from that landfill. There's emissions coming because of your waste. So that would be Scope 3. It's also used for life cycle emissions. So, thinking about the energy and product emissions that are used to generate, to develop, to make paper or plastic or whatever it is that we're using in our everyday lives. All of those fall into Scope 3. I also wanted to talk a little bit about a baseline year. So if you have now decided I'm going to do an inventory, you have to decide what year you're going to do it for. And it's not always as easy a decision as you might think. So when you're thinking about what year you want to choose for your baseline inventory, you need to think about how you're going to use the data. You also need to think about whether it's a kind of a normal year. If you don't want to pick a year that's very unusual for some reason. You know, I had a state that I was working with, and I actually thought there was a problem with their data because they had this huge spike in their power plant emissions one year. And it turned out that they had a nuclear plant, and the nuclear plant was shut down that year for, I don't know, safety repairs or something like that. So they had a really huge increase in fossil fuel emissions because all their fossil fuel plants were way high that year. So that would not have been a great year to choose as your baseline year, because if you were setting goals or targets off of that year, they would be kind of, you know, they wouldn't really be representative. So again, if it's a really, really warm year or a really cold year, that might skew your, you know, natural gas or oil consumption. There might be regulatory or voluntary things going on that affect what year you choose. You know, you might have an obligation to meet a reduction from a certain baseline year, either because of a voluntary commitment you've joined in or a regulatory one. Or you might just want to be compatible with baseline years that other places have chosen. A lot of communities chose 1990. People that have been doing this for a long time have chosen 1990 because that was what the Kyoto Protocol was based on. But more recently, people have chosen 2000 because it's a nice round year, 2005. And this really comes down to that last question there about data availability. You know, it's really great to say you want to go back to 1990, but that's 30 years ago now, and it can be really hard to get 30-year-old data. So maybe last year is the best year for you to do because that's the year that you can get the best data for. Maybe it's 2010, maybe it's 2015. So it's really important to choose something that's realistic and that works for what you need it to work for. There's not a right or wrong answer here about what year to choose. I also just quickly wanted to talk about how to put the results you get in context. So you've done an inventory, you have some numbers, and you want to know what it means. So I would really encourage you to look at other inventories. Many inventories are available online. So your state, the state you're in might have an inventory. You can see how your community kind of compares within the broader context of the state that you're located in. You might be able to compare to other tribes. Those are a little harder to find online, but they're starting to be available to other communities. It's important when you are comparing inventories, though, that you're comparing equivalent numbers. You might not have all looked at the same sources. You might not have all reported everything in terms of carbon dioxide equivalent. Some people might not have, you know, there's different kinds of greenhouse gas emissions. Some people convert everything to CO2 equivalent. Some people don't. There's different factors that are used to convert methane and nitrous oxide and the other greenhouse gases to CO2 equivalent. So you want to make sure you're kind of comparing equivalent numbers. But they're really helpful as kind of an order of magnitude check. You know, if you look and your emissions for your inventory for your community are larger than they are for the whole state, that might be an indicator that there is an error somewhere in your inventory. And it does happen. I've seen it happen. So it's a good thing to kind of look at how you compare to other entities as well. And then the last thing I would say is it can be really interesting to look at indicators like your emissions per capita, per household, or per dollar of economic activity to also kind of get a picture of how you fit into the broader conversation that's happening around greenhouse gas emissions. So with that said, I'm going to jump into the greenhouse gas inventory tool now. And so really what happened was when I came to EPA about 20 years ago, we had some written guidance for states and that was about it. And eventually we developed a tool for states. We had that for a number of years and we started getting a lot of questions from tribes and cities about how they could measure their greenhouse gas emissions as well. And so we wanted to help tribal governments across the US evaluate greenhouse gas emissions. We wanted them to be able to think about their own government operations. So what are the emissions from the government activities happening, but also for the broader community. We really wanted to think about how could we support baseline development for tracking trends, for developing mitigation policies, and assessing progress towards goals. And what we came up with was this idea to have a free, easy to use tool that was consistent with accepted protocols and methodologies. We didn't want people to have to figure it out and learn all of this stuff to be able to do an inventory. We wanted to kind of have a package that someone could take and run with without having to have a huge level of expertise. And so what we developed was this tribal greenhouse gas inventory tool. So some basic information about the tool. It is an Excel-based tool. We wanted to use Excel because people are familiar with it. They know how to use it. It's comfortable. And also, and this is a really huge thing, you don't need administrator privileges to install a new kind of software package on your computer. You most likely have Excel, most people have it, and you can just download the file and go ahead and run with it. It's divided into 2 modules. Each one can be used independently, or you can use both of them. So we have the government operations module and the community-wide module. I think you'll know from the names what they do. And it's really designed to be flexible to the needs and constraints of different users. So you can enter data at any scale. So, maybe you have one number rolled up for all of the states or all of the tribes' electricity use. If that's what you have, you can put it in like that. If you have it by department for your government operations, you can put it in like that. If you have it by building or by meter, you can enter it that way. So it's really up to you how you want to enter that data to make it useful. We do provide a lot of default emissions factors, but those can be overwritten if you have location-specific emissions factors. This might be for something like electricity, if you have a local provider who's giving you more specific numbers. You can also customize the year, how you set it up, the number of departments you have. All of that is customizable. We wanted this to be something that really would meet different people's specific needs, because every government across the US is different. So I'm going to do a very, very short overview of the government operations module, and then I'll spend a little bit longer on the community module and show you some screenshots. But the 2 modules are very similar, so I didn't want to spend a huge amount of time on both of them because I'd basically be showing you the same screenshots multiple times. But the way the government operations module is set up, it's based on the local government operations protocol, which was published by the Climate Registry and some partner groups quite a long time ago now, but it's still kind of the protocol that is used for local governments and tribal governments. There's 10 emission sectors. So we have our scope 1 emissions, which are looking at stationary fossil fuel, mobile fossil fuel use, solid waste management, and wastewater treatment. And again, that's for if there's a wastewater treatment operated by the government, or wastewater treatment plant operated by the government, or a landfill operated by the government. Then we have scope 2, the electricity consumption. And then for scope 3, we have kind of all of these other sources, which would be things like employee commute, if you're managing parks or agricultural land, urban forestry, waste generation and water use that's being done off-site, as well as any other additional sources. We always have a kind of blank space if there's some other emission source that we didn't include in the tool because it's not something we see very often. You can kind of, if you calculate it offline, that we always have a spot where you can add it in the tool. The way it's set up, and I know I'm going really fast, but I want to make sure I get through everything, and I will be happy to answer questions. And I'm always happy for people to reach out to me afterwards as well. So the way the government operations module is set up, you come in, there's a table of contents page. You use that to navigate through the tool. There's a control sheet where you set up the inventory with the name of the tribe, the year that you're doing the inventory for, who your electricity provider is, that kind of thing. Once you set that up, then you work through each source of emissions, you enter in your data, and then you come to a summary or calculation sheets that show you how you get from the activity data to the emissions. And then at the end, there's a summary page that pulls that all together. If that didn't make any sense to you, don't worry, because I'm going to go through the community module operation, which is very similar, and show you the screenshots, and it'll all become clear, I promise. So this is just an example of the table of contents page for the government operations module. So when you come in, there's some kind of intro and README and definitions. Then there's the inventory control sheet. And then you step through all of these different sheets and you see how you go through. There's the entry sheet where you enter the data. There's a data sheet where you can view all the data that you entered. And then there's the summary pages. And then at the very bottom, there's the whole inventory emission summary. So this basically is just a visual representation of what I just walked through on the previous slide. So in a little more detail, we'll talk about the community module. So the community module is based on ICLEI's Global Protocol for Community Scale Greenhouse Gas Emissions. It covers 9 sectors of community scale emissions. Again, very similar to the way the government operations module works. You have your scope 1, your direct fuel combustion, your solid waste that's going to a landfill within your community boundaries, and wastewater happening within your boundaries. Scope 2, electricity consumption, and scope 3, all of these other sources like land management, forestry, as well as your off-site emissions. And again, it's set up very similarly with the table of contents, the control sheet, the data sheets, and then the summary calculation sheets and the summary page. So now let's actually walk through that a little bit in a little bit more detail. So when you come in, you go to this navigation page or this table of contents page, and this can be used to navigate around the tool. These are actually clickable buttons. If you click on them, it will jump you to that section of the tool, and you can navigate that way. You can also just navigate. There's tabs along the bottom that you can use to navigate. And when you go to the inventory control sheet, this is where you enter your city, well, sorry, this says city on the screenshot, but here in the tribal version of the tool, you would enter your tribe name, your inventory year, and then it's set up for residential, commercial and institutional, industrial, and energy generation if you have control over a power plant or on-site power plant generation. You then put in your utility provider or the region of the country that you're getting your electricity in. This helps come up with an accurate number that takes into account the way power plants buy or power companies buy and sell electricity. And then at the very bottom, it's cut off in the screenshot. There's a little button that says set up inventory. Once you've done all that, you press setup, and that will then populate through all of the other sheets and make sure that they work correctly. And actually, I didn't show it on the previous page, but there were navigation tracking buttons up at the top as well. You can use that to always use those to go back to the table of contents and kind of see where you are within the sheet. There's also a box at the top that says, check if you have completed this sheet. Once you're done with a sheet, if you check that little box, it will actually color in the buttons on the table of contents page so that you can use that to track your progress through the tool. This is really helpful if you're not going to sit down and do the whole inventory in one shot. If you remember to check these buttons, it'll fill those in. You'll be able to come back next time and remember exactly where you left off. Or if you're going to hand the inventory tool off to someone else to complete, they'll be able to see exactly what you have gotten through. If you don't check this box, it doesn't hurt you. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't change the way the tool operates. It just doesn't color in the boxes on the table of contents page. So this is the data entry page, an example of what it looks like. This happens to be for electricity. There's a box that kind of explains how it works and tells you how to enter your data, but basically there's a bunch of boxes here. This is saying it's ID number 1 because it's the first thing you're entering. There's a unit description. That's just what you choose to call the unit so that you can distinguish among them. You can choose what type of facility it is. This is if you, want to give it some kind of additional name. And then there's also the department name. So this would be an example. In the community module, you would choose residential, commercial, industrial. In the government operations module here, you would be able to choose from a list of departments that you had typed into the tool. So that could be something like City Hall or Parks and Recreation or whatever department it is that you might want to track. And then you actually enter your electricity consumption and the utility provider. And so once you've done that, you simply click on Add Update Record, and then it'll be stored and you can add an additional one. And then if you now go back after you fill out some of these sheets, if you go back to the table of contents page, you can see that these boxes have changed color. When I first showed this to you, the inventory control sheet was white. These other colors had colored outline, or these other boxes had colored outlines, but they were not shaded in. Now I've gone through the whole inventory, I've clicked on the little buttons and they filled in to show that I have completed all of those boxes. And then when you've entered all your data, you get to the summary page. And so this just pulls everything together into one place. It gives you a bunch of different graphs and charts that you can pull out and use in reports. It lets you see everything in one place. So it breaks things up by the different gases. It shows you emissions by different scopes. It breaks it out by different sources. So you have your table of numbers, and then you have pie charts and bar charts and just different ways of looking at it. And so, you know, we found it's helpful for people to be able to look at that and to have the charts ready to go. Of course, you can just pull out the numbers and create your own charts if you want to do different color schemes or different kinds of graphs. And that is it. And I think we are going to take some questions.
Yeah, so we're so excited that y'all are here, and Andrea shared such great information. It was a lot. So please type in your questions. I guess while we wait for folks to chime in with questions, Andrea, you mentioned that some tribes have made their inventories publicly available. Do you know anyone specifically, or where can folks find that?
You know, that's a great question. I should have looked that up before I came here. So I know that Gila River did one a number of years ago. We had a grant with them, and as the first step of their grant, they did their inventory. And I'm not sure if it's still available online. It used to be. I'm not sure if it is anymore. But that was in about 2015. I would have to look that up. I know we have quite a few. I have quite a few names of folks who have downloaded the tribal tool. So another thing I could do as well is share some of those names, because even if people haven't published it, they may have worked on it. And I think it's helpful to have other people to talk to who've done an inventory, even if it hasn't necessarily been published. But I can look for that, and maybe we can add it or share it with people afterwards.
Great. And there's a question here: is either the government or community modules less flexible for tribe-specific needs?
Well, I guess I would say the community module might be a little less flexible, just because it's kind of set up in these, like, it's commercial, residential, industrial, and power sector pieces. We really did try to have them both be pretty flexible as much as they can be, and still follow the protocol methods. Where we've had a few questions in the past is just because these are modeled after protocols that are really intended for fairly urban areas. Sometimes there's been a thought that they don't always represent some of the more agricultural or, you know, open land sectors quite as well. So that's where I would say they might be a little bit lacking. There are ways to work around that. You know, for example, we have nothing in here about animal populations. And if you are managing animal populations, which some communities are, some tribes are, there isn't a way to calculate those emissions. But we have some other tools aimed at states that could be used if you have numbers of animals. You can just plug it into the state tool and use it that way. So I'm happy to help anyone who needs to customize it a little bit more.
Nice. Well, and someone even chimed in that they're in the process of completing this inventory, and they wish they had this intro a couple months ago. So
I wish you'd had it too.
Yeah. And another question, are tribal governments required to use the government module?
No, this is all really completely voluntary. EPA has no requirements for any kind of government to do greenhouse gas reporting. This is really meant to help people who want to do this for your own goals or your own reasons. The only exception there would be if you are in a state that, and I'm not even sure if any states have that kind of mandate. I think California has it for local governments, but I'm not sure that that includes tribal governments anyway. And I don't think any other states have it. They don't even require a specific tool be used. So it's really about your own uses and your own interests.
Mm-hmm. Oh, great. And someone chimed in that Gila River, with the contact for Gila River, that they're open to sharing it. So his email.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put Gila River on the spot. So thank you.
Well, and they're in Region 9. So this is mostly Region 9 tribes. So that's great. And it says, I might have missed this, but does this take into account solar on facilities? So do you have like some green power element?
Yeah, so if you have direct solar power on your facilities, that's going to get taken into account because you're not going to have to purchase as much electricity. So your purchased electricity numbers are going to be lower. If you are purchasing green power, from like through renewable energy credits or from your power provider, we're actually about to update the tool to reflect newer methodology around that. So I would say like maybe wait a week or two to download it, or check with me and make sure that you have the updated version. We are adding there's 2 approaches now that places can use to help account for those purchases of green power so that it kind of gets recognized in your total. It's a great question.
Cool. Well, I think that's most of the questions that have come in. Oh, and does this help in calculating carbon footprint credits?
So, this is not intended to be used for any kind of crediting purpose. It's probably not quite that level of rigor, but it would really be, I think, up to whoever is issuing the credit in terms of what they consider as acceptable documentation.
Mm-hmm. Great. So that looks like all the questions we have for now. So we'll continue on, but please, everyone, continue typing in your questions and we'll still have more time at the end.
Yep, and I'll be around the whole time, so.
Yay. Well, then thank you so much. That was really informative. Okay, so now I will take over. I'm taking it over. So I'm Jenny Stephenson, and I'm with Region 9. So I work on tribal solid waste and sustainable materials management. And one of the things that we love to talk about is the climate connection between how materials are managed and the greenhouse gas impacts. So while the tribal greenhouse gas inventory tool is really our star of this showcase, I did want to include a few infomercials on some of our other tools that help you calculate the greenhouse gas emissions. And my favorite one, I could talk all day about this, is Energy Star Portfolio Manager. It is the most modern tool that EPA has created, I feel like. It's like a commercial tool. It's all secure, online, interactive resource that helps you track and assess your energy, water, and waste across a single building or your whole property of buildings. I find it helpful in that it, well, for this purpose, you can use it to track your energy use, both the on-site green power that's generated on-site, your green power purchases. It has a lot of features in creating custom reports. You can easily share data with others within your organization and outside of it, and it has hundreds of metrics. So it can really be the tool where you're tracking your energy and utility invoices. And then so when you need to pull out those annual numbers or you need to pull that data out, you have those ready to go when you're doing your inventory or for other reporting purposes. You can find it there. to get started, some basic information is just like your building details, and then your utility invoices. So you can track energy, water, and waste, or you can just start off with energy, however you want to do it. And it's easy to get started. You can create your account and do it in like 3 minutes flat. So here's where it's located, and then just click the register now to set up your username and password. There's a lot of training resources available on the Energy Star website, including webinars and one-pagers and how-to guides. And then even within the tool, it has some prompting questions that you can use to get set up and going really quickly. You can customize a lot of the metrics available in the tool. And since today's session is really focused on greenhouse gas emissions, you can include total GHG emissions. You can look at GHG emissions intensity, like per square foot of your building. And I'll just highlight here. So at the very top, you can see the tabs of, this is the basic orientation of the tool. The My Portfolio tab shows all your buildings in your account. The Sharing tab allows you to tailor customize your sharing features with other people, both in and outside of your organization. The Reporting tab I'll get to, and then Recognition is if you are applying for the Energy Star certification, which is based on, or recognizes high energy performers. And then the second set of tabs, the Summary tab is really how this single property is performing. Details are operating characteristics like number of workers, operating hours, some of the key operational details that impact a property's energy use and its 1 to 100 score. Energy is where you enter in your energy data, your water use data, waste and materials. You can enter in your how you manage materials. So if you're donating it, recycling, composting it, or disposing of it. And then there's also goals and design tab. Design tab is if your property hasn't been built yet. 3 great ways to enter in data. One, you can do it the manual way, but it also has really great features on doing it quickly. So you can upload the spreadsheet if you have lots of data. And then the other part that I really love is, let's see, hopefully you guys aren't seeing my face over my slides. Let me, web services. So the web services feature is really popular actually within California. A lot of the utilities here and in some parts of Arizona will, if you provide the link, you can connect your portfolio manager account to your utility provider, and then your data is automatically entered in the tool. So you don't even have to like find the invoice and type it in each month. So that's a really great feature. And we're hoping that some of the waste haulers start to do that as well. And we're starting to see some water utilities do it, not as much in California, but that is an option out there. And then the reporting features within Portfolio Manager, the great thing about the tool is while you can put a lot of data in, you can also get a lot of data out in kind of with insightful analysis and graphs. So here there's a custom report for total GHG emissions intensity. You can do your energy performance, and there's a whole bunch of your emissions performance. And there's a lot of other ready to go reports available. Okay, now transitioning to our waste reduction model, also commonly called WARM. In a real nutshell, like WARM is a life cycle emissions based calculator that enables you to quantify the impacts of source reduction, recycling, and composting compared to had the material been landfilled or incinerated. So that's what it does. The only data you need is a tonnage by material or material type and where it went. I'll emphasize it's really a life cycle assessment. So while you're making the decision today, like, okay, do I start up a composting program or do I send these bales of cardboard for recycling? When you see the GHG emission impact or benefit, it's really like, had you sent that organics to a landfill and over a course of 100 years, the methane that would have produced. So this is why it's like life cycle and not just like those emissions were what was emitted like today or in 2020. So that's something like, unlike your energy emissions, the life cycle emissions that you see in warm really are like the full impacts of that material and how it was managed. And warm takes into the sources and sinks of greenhouse gases, both from its manufacturing stage to how it was used, or not how it was used, but then like acquired, manufactured, and then its end of life and whether or not it was returned to recycling. So if you recycle paper, it offsets, you know, the growth of new trees because gets turned into recycled content. So that is warm. And for each of the 60 different material types within the tool, you can see there's a individualized life cycle of that material. So here we have the aluminum can, and you start at the top, get the material for it. It's aluminum ingot, it gets manufactured into a can, it's transported, and then we're at the end of life. So it could go to recycling, combustion, or landfilling. You have the sorting and transportation. So all that's kind of included within the tool. And then if it's recycled, then it goes back to manufacturing another can, and that's where you get the benefits. There's two versions of warm available. There's an Excel version, which I just like Excel, but there's also a zip file that you can download the application as well. And that's what you see on the left hand. That's the orange one. And it's really based on, you have a baseline scenario and then you put in that same amount in your alternative scenario. So it's a little easier to see here. So let's say I had 10 tons of corrugated cardboard and I recycled it rather than landfilling it. I had 2 tons of food waste that I composted, and I was able to source reduce 1 ton rather than landfilling it. I recycled some PET, like plastic bottles and aluminum cans, and then I can see the benefits of those actions. So maybe I want to quantify, like for my solid waste program, for my leadership, the greenhouse gas impacts of what we did this year. Warm is the tool that you can use. And you can see within warm, it has these little equivalents. So it's like, oh, like your impacts were equivalent to removing 19 passenger vehicles. But if you want an even better tool for translating these abstract concepts and metrics, like what is a metric ton of carbon dioxide equivalent, then we have the tool for you, the Greenhouse Gas Equivalencies Calculator. This is another one that I love. It's just like super short and quick. I mean, there was a lot of data that goes into the background of it, but like, I mean, I've worked on this for several years and I can't really tell you what a metric ton of carbon dioxide equivalent looks like. But this is what this tool helps do. It makes these kind of abstract, like a metric ton of carbon. Like, what is that equivalent to? It makes it understandable, and it can help you improve your communications with your community, with your leadership. So all you need for data is any unit of energy or emissions data. This is what the tool looks like. It's all online. You simply type in like what you have. So I have 100 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, and then I can see with like these cute little pictures, oh, that's equivalent to the CO2 emissions from had I burned 232 barrels of oil. Okay, cool. Or that's equivalent to the greenhouse gas emissions of more than 21 cars removed from the road. So this is a really handy tool in helping you find some equivalencies that can speak to the community. And sometimes if you have a really small metric, the smartphone's charge, like it always saves, you'll always see a big number here. So if you don't have a huge metric ton of carbon dioxide equivalent, look for the smartphone's charge, and that's a good one. So please bookmark this one because this can definitely help in communications. And then lastly, this Sustainable Materials Management Prioritization tool. The main takeaway with this tool is just that it's essentially an invitation to look upstream. this tool is based on a more complex, like EPA's US Environmentally Extended Input-Output model, which at a very national level takes economic data from industries and associates the environmental impacts of those. But at just a high level, this is kind of the modernized version of a consumption-based inventory. So it really looks at like how what you decide to purchase has impacts upstream. I mean, that's your purchases are driving things upstream. So right now, this tool doesn't, like, you don't put any data. It's just really based on your type of organization, what might be based on the data that we have, what are some of the areas that you might want to focus your efforts if you were to look upstream? And one of the key reasons to look upstream is, like, while you have direct control over your operations, what's striking is that when you kind of take this extended view, what we find is that for a lot of organizations, most of their greenhouse gas impacts are resulting from their purchases of goods or services. It's things that the supply chain generated. Like, so that would be their supply chain's greenhouse gas impacts. But if you think about your purchasing decisions as being a mechanism to kind of send a message and help reduce those upstream emissions, this would be where you could focus your efforts. So it kind of identifies, of course, like electricity is really big, waste management comes up there, cement. So it's an indicator of where you might want to focus efforts if you're looking upstream. So that, in a real infomercial nutshell, are the several tools. And here's our contact information, Andrea's email address and my email address. I know nothing about the tribal greenhouse gas inventory tool, but I could talk all day about Portfolio Manager and WORM and the others. So here's our information. And with that, need to see if I can't quite see the chat here. So are there any questions?
Hey, this is Deirdre. I just wanted to ask a question about looking at when you're comparing all these tools. Let's say you're a tribe that is only interested in looking at the greenhouse gas aspects of one particular tribal operation. Maybe you're only looking at, should we change up our vehicle fleet, or should we purchase this truck or that truck? What's the model that might be the most helpful for that type of incremental decision?
Andrea, I'd have to look at you. I don't know about like fleet change out, really.
Yeah, so these tools are really, well, at least the tribal tool, sorry, I'm just going to start that whole sentence over. The tribal greenhouse gas inventory tool is really meant for kind of the bigger picture. So it's not great at getting down to like a very specific decision or choice that you're making like that. There are some tools on EPA's Office of Transportation and Air Quality site that help compare different vehicles. So again, if you're really getting down to the level of like this car or that car, they have some very simple calculators where you basically are just choosing the model year and off a list, and it'll tell you the different emissions profiles of those tools and how much money they take to run and all that kind of thing. And then, if you want to look at a whole fleet, there are some fleet management tools. That the DOE has a Clean Cities program. Some of the national labs have some tools out that help look at fleet management. If you want to look at an individual building, I would say Portfolio Manager would be your best bet to look at that level.
Thank you. We had a request to go back to the calculator comparison tool slide. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what tool, what slide that is. Does that ring a bell with either of you? Jefferson, do you want to say more about that?
I think the equivalency calculator.
Oh, well, this is a good one. Here's where to find it. or you can just Google search, EPA greenhouse gas equivalency calculator, and it has both the energy and the emissions data. So you can see kind of on the left-hand side, there's a tab if you have energy data, like BTUs or kilowatt hours. You can enter that in, and then today I focused on the emissions data. So depending on what emissions data you have, it will translate it into these kind of more relatable units.
Thank you. Anybody else have any more questions? I'm not seeing any in the chat box.
Everyone's ready for lunch. Okay, well, I guess if we don't have any more questions, I'll say thank you so much for your time, and really, like, hopefully you've taken away that these tools exist. There are people here that can help you, Andrea, me, like other resources that, please know that they're there. They can help you quantify the greenhouse gas impacts of your actions and, provide a strategic directional sense for where you want to invest your efforts, both at a very big scale and at a smaller scale, like within a building or within a program. So please reach out if you have any further questions, and the slides are available on the website. And I think that's everything. So thank you all so much, and have a great day.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Jenny. It's great to hear from you.
Cool. Thanks.